Well, welcome everyone, and good morning. I'm Nathan Albrecht with the Land Connections Illinois Farmland Program. We're so glad that you're here for the second session of Do More with Your Farmland webinar series. We are offering this series because we've just had a lot of experience and interactions with a lot of farmland owners who are looking to get more information and get more ideas for how their farmland management can match their values and enrich their lives and something they can feel good about. This was a Farmland Owners Conference back in 2023, put on by Extension. There was over 160 people there. There's just a lot of people like you who are really curious and just see the potential for how their farmland could meet multiple goals, including income generation, making the land more alive, being something that they're really proud of as a legacy, those kinds of things. And I think a lot of farmland owners don't know that it's possible to have a really good relationship with your farmer if they share your values and you're kind of in sync and you're learning together and you're enjoying the life of the land together. This is a farmland owner, Harry Drucker, on the left, and a farmer, Nathan Keister, on the right, who are in the cab. They're about to crimp some rye, and they feel very fortunate to have found each other because they're being profitable, but they're also doing things that are making the soil more alive. And it's just really works out extremely well. And so that's the goal of the series, is to share information, share roadmaps and ideas that kind of help you figure out, okay, here's something I heard, now I can learn more about it. And we're also hopeful that this will just empower you to feel like, you know what, I can do something with my farmland. I can do more with it. And I know that there's people out there who are ready to help, because there are a lot of people who are ready to help. And it's all about matching your values and your needs with your particular piece of land. And now I'd like to introduce just a little bit about our organization. And while I'm doing this, we'd love to know a little bit more about you. If you could just share something about your farmland that you're either curious about, worried about, or just like super happy about, whether it's a particular view, the soil quality, whatever, something that just makes that land special to you. If you could put that into the chat, that would be great. So again, I'm Nathan Albrecht with the Land Connections Illinois Farmland Program. Jeannie, would you mind introducing yourself briefly?
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Jeannie Jansen, and I am also with the Illinois FarmLink program, and I will just be running the dials and doing the tech today.
Great. Thank you, Jeannie. So the Land Connection is a nonprofit based in Champaign, formed in the early 2000s, and it's all about trying to contribute to a better food and farming system for Illinois. And we do that through a variety of things. We have farmer training, a variety of farmer training activities, including webinars, in-person meetings, the Idea Farm Network, which we would encourage you to join. We have an organic grain conference once a year in Champaign. We also help out with the Midwest mechanical weed control field day. We also really care about whether people have access to local food. So we run a winter and summer farmers market. And then we also, at those markets and other markets, make available food benefits, nutrition benefits, so that people's buying power can go a lot further and they can afford good food. And then we also have our land access work, which is what Illinois FarmLink is all about. We provide advice to farmers and landowners around land issues. We empower people like you through these kinds of programs, the resources, that kind of thing. And we actually do some direct connecting. Our website has a profile system where you can put in your data and what you're looking for. And just like a dating site, it's not a dating site, you can make a connection that could be really good for you. And we when we have free advising. We have a separate staff person for each of our 3 regions of Illinois. And I guess I just want to reemphasize our advising. If you look in the right-hand side of this slide, you can see that we offer advising services for farmland owners. We can help you define and sharpen your goals, connect you with helpful resources, and also help you develop a plan for how you're going to find the right farmer. We're happy to do that. It's free, no matter what. Please call us if you have a chance. And then we have this land a Farmland FarmLink contact information as well. Please reach out to us. So just to recap, in the last webinar, we mostly talked about your goals and your values. That's the foundational part of figuring out how you're going to manage your land. And we also had a really, I think, inspiring landowner farmer story. One of the things we introduced in that session last week was a roadmap, sort of just like a way of breaking up a complex task of thinking about your farmland and breaking it up into 5 segments, and with preparation planning being sort of the first 2 segments. So you're going to see us touching on all pieces of this roadmap as we go forward. So today we're going to be talking about farmland basics, your land's ecology and soil health. We've got 3 really good speakers. I think you're really going to enjoy that. And we're also going to have some polling at the very end, which we hope you can just help us out by staying around for that polling. And finally, I'm sure most of you have used Zoom, but just in case you haven't used it too much recently, there are 3 key buttons. One is the mute, unmute button. If everyone can have the mute working, mute is when there's the red diagonal line through your microphone. If you could do that, that's going to help everyone learn better. There's the video feed button. Happy to see your faces. We like seeing people's faces. But for data bandwidth, it would actually be helpful for you not to have your camera on. And then third, there's the chat button. That's a way of sort of seeing resources that we share and sharing little comments and questions. Please, as always, be compassionate and courteous and respectful in your comments in the chat world. And with that, I am going to stop sharing, and we are going to have our first speaker. Let's see here. There we go. Our first speaker is Spring Duffey. She's the executive director of the McHenry County Soil and Water Conservation District. She's been with the district for 27 years, I believe. She was awarded the 2018 Illinois Soil and Water Conservation District Staff Person of the Year, which says something about her. I've known Spring for about 10 years, and she is one of the most helpful people around farmland and farm issues. For example, we connected her with one beginning farmer who needed help assessing a piece of land and its soil conditions, and she was happy to go out. So we're really grateful to have Spring. Spring, why don't you take it away?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Nathan, for that introduction. Yes, I've been with the district since I graduated college in 1998, and I do love working with landowners. That's probably the highlight of my day. And today I'm going to share what to look for when evaluating your parcel for different agricultural uses. I'm going to evaluate a real parcel that's located in McHenry County, just north of Marengo, Illinois. And while walking through a theoretical discussion with the landowner, hopefully it will provide you with the tools and resources that you can use to evaluate your own property. Now, last summer, Miss Jennifer Smith called my office asking for assistance. Her father had passed away and left her sibling and her a 40-acre parcel with a home and row crop farmland. Through discussions with her sibling, they decided to sell off the home along with the 10 acres. Jennifer had been extremely attached to the farm as a child, and she decided to keep the remaining 30 acres as her inheritance. The farm has consistently been in row crop production, and when her father retired from the farm operation, the land was leased to another grower who continued to grow corn and soybeans. With Jennifer's love for the land and articles she had read regarding regenerative agriculture, she had wondered if continuously row cropping the ground was best for the soil and the environment. And she asked if I could assist her in evaluating the options. I told her the first thing we really needed to do was understand what was currently there. So Jennifer and I went online to Web Soil Survey, where we zoomed into her parcel and created our soil map. Now, she had never read a soil map before, so I walked her through those basics. The first set of numbers that you see here, like 527, indicate the soil type. In this case, it's Kidney Silt Loam, and that name gives you an idea of the soil's texture. The letter you see after the number indicates the soil slope. The further down the alphabet you go, the steeper the slope. And you can see in our table here, the slopes on the parcel range between 0 and 12%. Now that number located after the letter indicates just how eroded that soil is. And in our case, about 42% of our parcel soil was considered eroded. Now that we knew those soil types on the parcel, we looked into their ratings and their limitations. The first rating we explored was the National Commodity Crop Productivity Index. The soils are grouped from low to high inherent productivity. Now, a high inherent productivity indicates that the soil, site, and climate have features that are very favorable for crop production, which include high yields and a low risk of crop failure. Low inherent productivity indicates the soil has one or more features that are unfavorable for crop production. You can expect that you're going to have low yields and a high risk of crop failure. And of course, those moderate ratings are somewhere in between. Now, for our parcel, you can see that the majority of the site is within this high or moderately high inherent productivity. Now, we left Web Soil Survey for a minute to look at another resource commonly used in Illinois for determining farmland tax assessments, and that's the Illinois Crop Productivity Index. Now, in the 2000s, the University of Illinois published bulletins 810 and 811. The bulletins evaluated the mean annual yield for 10 years based on soil type for crop, pasture, and forestry use. A rating of 47 to 147 was developed, with the soils in that upper range being more productive. And you can see here the Class A soils have a rating between 133 to 147. Class B is 117 to 132. Class C is 100 to 116, and anything under that 100 is considered non-prime. Now, Jennifer and I did a quick calculation. We did remove the water acreage out of there because there's no soil score associated with it. And then we adjusted the percent of our soil types. We looked in the bulletin and we found our productivity index score for each of those soil types. And we adjusted it down for those soils that have steeper slopes. And there's a table in that bulletin that shows you how to adjust those scores. We then took the adjusted percent times that PI score, which gave us our weighted average, added those all up, and that gave us our total productivity index for the site, which was 119.5, which you can see is kind of on that lower end of the Class B soils. So she doesn't have like the worst soils, but she also doesn't have the most productive soils in the state either. Now, after determining that productivity index, we moved on to capability class, which shows the suitability of soils for most field crops, and it also looks at those management considerations. Now, soils are broken into 8 categories. Class 1 soil means the soil has very few limitations that restrict its use. Class 2, which is highlighted in orange on our map, means the soil has moderate limitations that reduce the choice of plants or require moderate conservation practices. In our case, that probably means you should probably be utilizing no-till or strip-till to help add extra material to the surface to help hold that soil in place. Class 3, the yellow areas on our map, have a severe limitation that reduce the choice of plants or that require special conservation practices. Again, using that no-till or strip-till or perhaps bringing in cover crops would be beneficial on this site. Lastly, Class 8, identified in this bluish area on our map, indicates that these areas are not suited for agricultural production and are best used for like recreation or wildlife habitat. Now, the last resource in Web Soil Survey we looked at was hydric soils, which have formed under conditions of saturation, flooding, or ponding long enough during the growing season to cause anaerobic conditions or the lack of oxygen. In the key, you can see it breaks down the percent of soil that contains hydric components. I told her I was most concerned with these top 2 categories, that red and orange. You can see on our piece, we have a pretty decent sized area of orange, which can be up to 99% hydric. The fact that the majority of that soil is farmed tells me that it's most likely drained. I asked Jennifer if she ever remembered her father adding or fixing drainage tile. She asked me what that was, and I explained that there are a series of underground pipes that remove excess subsurface water from the fields, and it helps maintain proper soil moisture, prevents waterlogging, and it also allows for machinery to access the crop safely. She did not remember her father mentioning tiles. And unfortunately, many landowners have kept that knowledge to themselves, and there are not a lot of publicly available resources showing those tile locations. Historical aerials sometimes can show drainage tile signs, including herringbone-like fish patterns, but unfortunately, we were unable to find any aerials that did. And this is something that we will have to try to find out in the field. I told her to expect that drain tiles will eventually fail, especially those tiles that are placed in hydric soils that contain large amounts of organic matter. Now, moving on from Web Soil Survey, Jennifer and I looked at other resources that would help paint a picture of the land. From our soil survey map, we already knew that we had slopes between 0 to 12%. So Jennifer and I went onto our local county GIS website, and we were able to create a topographic map of her parcel. Each line on our map indicated a 5-foot difference in elevation, and I explained how the closer the lines were together, the steeper the soils. And you can see in this northeastern portion of our parcel, our slopes go from 975 feet down to 940 feet in elevation. I also showed her how to look for the V's. These indicate drainage patterns that can be areas of concentrated erosion where gullies can form. Grass waterways are often used in these areas, which are wide, shallow channels planted with permanent vegetation that control water runoff, prevent soil erosion, and help improve water quality. Now, the next thing we determined was if there were any wetlands on the parcel. I explained that this can have an impact on what you can actually utilize that land for. Wetlands are regulated by many agencies, including the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Army Corps of Engineers, and even local stormwater management agencies. Working in wetlands may require a permit, or it may not even be allowed, depending on what you're trying to do. So on our parcel, we found a few possible wetland areas that may require special consideration, depending on what Jennifer would like to accomplish. Now, another consideration we evaluated was floodplain. Most people have probably heard of FEMA. They provide maps throughout the United States indicating those areas that are subject to flooding, typically during that 100-year storm, or have a 1% chance each year of flooding. Some areas in the state also have what are called flood of record maps, which show inundation during significant flood events. In the case of McHenry County, where our parcel is located, this map indicates flooding during either the 1967, 1970, or 1971 floods. I explained how these maps can be useful as they show drainage patterns across the field and can indicate where she may currently have gully issues or will in the future. And that kind of lines up with the topography map that we already had looked at. I also told her permitting for work in the floodplain may be required for things such as construction of bridges, culverts, or filling within those areas. Now, if you recall, in my first conversation with Jennifer, she had indicated that she inherited approximately 30 acres of tillable ground. In looking through the maps with her, we began to wonder if that truly was the case. Of our 30-acre parcel, a few areas jumped out at us. One is this wetland pond area, 2 is this wooded wetland area, and 3, there is a stream that bisects the parcel, and we could not see access to that southern acreage. It appears that the individual who's currently farming it is coming in from the south. If there is no current access, it may take additional permitting and capital to reach it. If we remove that area, we are looking at about 23 acres of tillable ground. So it may be beneficial for Jennifer to keep the southern portion in a separate lease with an individual to the south if she decides to go a different route with that parcel to the north. Or she can look at converting the southern portion of her parcel into a non-agricultural use. Now, although in Jennifer's case, her property does have pretty decent access, it's always important to remember where that parcel is located and how your grower will realistically get their equipment there. Unlike my husband, this may not be your idea of a fun Sunday drive. Dodging cars in a subdivision with a huge John Deere sprayer trying to reach your field. Now, Jennifer next asked me about moving away from row crop production. What about converting that area to pasture and bringing animals onto the land? I told her there's quite a bit to consider. It's more than just establishing vegetation and then releasing the animals. Now, where will they get their water? Do you have to drill a well? Do you have adequate fencing? Where will you establish shelter, loafing areas, and paths? And how will you handle their waste? Will you pay for those improvements, or do you expect your tenant to do it? She hadn't realized that there was that much to consider, so she switched gears and asked about specialty crops. Again, water became an issue. Without a current well, one would need to be drilled, and it would have to be adequately sized for irrigation needs. Additionally, storage of equipment would have to be addressed. I told her that she could not expect her grower to daily haul in what he needed in and out of her site. She may have to consider building a shed. The shed could also provide an area for them to place their harvested crops before delivery. Other items that may be handy for specialty growers include high tunnels, which extend the season, exclusion fencing, which can keep those critters at bay, and also establishing paths that connect the beds. She agreed that it was all a lot to consider and that wanting animals or specialty crops on her land wasn't as easy as she had thought. So at this point, we agreed to meet out at the site and do a bit of ground truthing. We looked at the areas of steep soils and did find that the topsoil had indeed eroded. The crops within those areas were stunted and showed signs of stress, especially with the lack of rain. We dug a few holes throughout the field and looked for biological activity. And we also found some areas of soil crusting, which showed poor infiltration. We then tested compaction by simply sticking a flag into the soil until it resisted us, and found that it only went in about 6 inches in most areas and less than 4 inches in others, indicated we had moderate to severe compaction. We then searched in that stream area for tile outlets, and we found 3 of them, which were old clay tiles, indicating that our hydric soil was indeed drained, and that because they were clay, they had not been recently replaced. We also determined that there is not access to that southern cropped area. I then asked her if she could ask her current tenant for some information. Does he do soil testing? Does he have yield data, input data, and would he be willing to share? Unfortunately, she was not able to get that information. So I instructed her on how to take a few soil samples throughout the property, and she sent them into a company called A&L Great Lakes, and they evaluated that soil and gave her an indication that our current tenant did appear to be taking care of her soil and adding appropriate inputs. At this point, she began to wonder if there were other options she had not considered. So I walked her through possible funding sources for improving her parcel. Our soil and water conservation districts implement the state of Illinois cost share programs. The main program is Partners for Conservation District for Conservation. This provides up to 75% cost share for eligible projects, including cover crops, converting from conventional till to no-till or strip till, establishing pollinator habitat, grass waterways, sealing abandoned wells, and other practices. A few of NRCS's programs that I highlighted included EQIP, which is often referred to as that Fix-It program. There's a huge suite of practices ranging from assistance for row crop, forestry, wildlife, livestock, to specialty crops. You work with your local NRCS staff to develop a conservation plan that meets your goals and your vision. And this plan helps you select the right conservation practices for your land. CSP helps producers maintain and improve their existing conservation systems. It pays participants for conservation performance. The higher the performance, the more practices you have, and the higher the payment will be. And lastly, the Farm Service Agency CRP program provides annual rental payments, incentive payments, and cost share assistance for establishing long-term covers such as pollinators, grassland habitat, and also tree cover. Now, at this time, Jennifer is still weighing her options, and she bounces things off of me now and then. The current lease with her tenant goes until 2028, so she wants to take her time and make the right decision for herself and the future of her land. And just a quick reminder of those resources we utilized. For us, Web Soil Survey was a wonderful place to start, and it provided us with a great background. We utilized Google Earth to search for signs of drainage. You're able to toggle through aerials for various years, and it gives you a pretty good lay of the land and can show you how that property was utilized. Also, we visited our county's online mapping services, which showed us different resource layers, including wetlands, floodplain, and topography. A few other digital resources included the National Wetland Inventory, FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer Viewer, and lastly, don't forget your local county soil and water conservation district, NRCS, or Farm Service Agency. They can provide you with one-on-one support and assist in evaluating your property's strengths, limitations, and improvement needs. Your local NRCS and SWCD office also has a soil health test kit bucket that they can do a quick evaluation of your soil. Some of the evaluations are tied to certain times of the year, so keep in mind that it may take you a few visits to obtain a clear picture. We recommend calling our office to set up an appointment, bringing in your tax parcel index number, an aerial, or an FSA track map with you will also assist in starting that conversation. So I hope that discussing this theoretical talk that I had with Jennifer gave you a good indication of the things to consider in evaluating your own parcel. And with that, I will take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Spring. Really appreciate it. We're just running a little behind schedule. I had one question that came up from Patty. She said, we have 40 acres in Madison County, Illinois that is eroding and are told we need drain tile to help. However, the cost is quite high, so would love more info and options and resources for this. Any thoughts, Spring?
Yeah, I would just, I'm wonder if you actually went into your local NRCS office and got other options. Tile may not necessarily be the right option for that. It may be something where you're introducing cover crops, changing your tillage system. So there's quite a few things to consider. And what's nice about the NRCS office is that they can develop that conservation plan I mentioned, and it will give you different ideas. And then they also can give you an idea of some of those costs so you can figure out what works best for you and your operation.
Great. So just like you were saying before, to visit the NRCS, you would probably call ahead and set up an appointment, right?
Correct. There are some times of the year where they're very busy. Like right now, they're
Okay.
finishing up a few deadlines. So it may take them
Got
a
it.
little bit, but they will get to you.
Got it. All right. Thanks. So David, just quick introduction. David grew up on a diversified family farm in West Central Illinois. He studied agricultural economics. We started working in the retail business, the farm retail business around seeds and inputs, and then had a major change, which I think he'll talk about, and ended up eventually launching his own consulting firm called Progressive Agronomy. And I think it's worth or just quoting what the mission of his consulting firm is, which is empowering farmers with advanced soil testing, optimized nutrient application timing, and fostering microbial diversity, bridging conventional and regenerative practices to enhance both immediate yields and long-term soil health. I've seen and heard David do a number of presentations. He is very direct and he can speak from a lot of experience, and is also deeply passionate about the damage being done to soils in so many different ways in our current agriculture. David, why don't you take it away?
Hey, thank you, Nathan. And I'll try to make it quick here. And Nathan knows I can talk. So a little background. Nathan already kind of explained kind of what I do and everything, and a little bit of history about me. I did work in ag retail for about 10 years, selling seed chemical fertilizer and on the conventional system. And grew up on that family farm that was pretty conventional as well. Had a kind of some aha moments during the 2012 drought year where I was looking at using some cover crops to sequester out some nutrients, excess nutrients that weren't going to be taken up by our cash crops. And that led me to start using cover crops frequently on a lot of highly erodible land and trying to keep the soil in place. And I really started to dive in deeper, I guess, on what was going on beyond just the chemical aspect of the soil on nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and understanding more about the biological aspect of the soil. So that led me in 2018 to start my own business where I do consulting with farmers and landowners kind of across the Midwest here. I've been fortunate in previous endeavors I was in to actually consult all across the country as well. So I've seen a lot of things from East Coast to West Coast, from basically the Canadian border to Mexico, and I can tell you that there's no one thing, one way of farming that fits every acre out there. So That's that a little bit. I guess I'll mention that I am from Vandalia, Illinois, or that's where I reside now. I'm originally from around the Beardstown, Illinois area. So I work out of this Vandalia, Fayette County area. Um, So I think it is this is probably one of my favorite slides here, and I'll let you guys read it. But to look at this, thinking about the anniversary of our country, 250 years basically, and thinking about what was happening 250 years ago with the soil then, and some letters from George Washington to Alexander Hamilton, and even to Thomas Jefferson and some others. There are some very good books out there that have on record what George Washington was doing on his farm, and looking at how to conserve the soil. He was doing a lot with cover crops. He was doing a lot with crop rotations and grazing different animals in different areas. He was making compost before compost was ever cool, and digging soil basically out of a creek bed and using that to help inoculate some of his soils and stuff for his compost. Um, and one of the another letter to I think it's Thomas Jefferson, between Washington and him, where it's talking about how the improving the soil and everything. And Jefferson basically said, well, it's cheaper instead of using manure and all of that, it's just cheaper to go find new land. And I think now we're at a point, in our own country that we have no new land to go and find. So we have to try to enhance the soils that we have here. And really, when you think about it, I don't know if anybody has ever read any of the David Montgomery books, but there is no civilization that has ever outlived its soils. So you start thinking about that and going back to, you know, um, you know, 300 AD time frame, and thinking about the destruction of soils. It's pretty impressive. So what got me started on this is one time, what really got me going to helping some farmers, and this is one of my neighbors actually. It's one of his fields, and what you're looking at here is on the bed of my truck. The soil on the left came from a fence row, and the soil on the right is what he was farming. Um, and I dug this up and I took it to his farm and I was showing him it. And he's like, "Man, where'd you get that soil on the left?" I was like, he's like, "It looks like it came from Central Illinois." I said, "No, that came from the fence row. Literally, these two soils are 10 feet apart from each other." And he saw that and he's like, "Huh, I think we need to do something different. That soil that we farmed could be better." Well, that night we caught an inch rain, and I took a picture of this and sent it to him. The soil was still sitting back my truck after that inch. And what you can see is that soil that's on the left that came from the fence row, it stayed together and it didn't just fall apart. Where the soil on the right, his soil from the field, basically turned into what I would call diarrhea. It was just running out of the bed of the truck. There was no structure to it. There was no stability to it. It just could not withstand the pressure of water. When water fell and tried to infiltrate into that soil, it just fell apart. And that was his aha moment. This right here allowed this farmer, and he farms about 2,000 acres. His aversion to risk is I guess, pretty low. So he or pretty high. He just went to 100% that fall. He planted cover crops on 100% of all of his acres. Most guys, I'd say, generally will dabble in, maybe a 20 or 30 or 40 acre piece that nobody can see, but not him. He did 100% of his acres that year because he said, we've got to keep our soils in place, and I want my soils to look like the ones on the left. So, thinking about that letter from Washington there, and this was just a couple years ago in Champaign County. But when you look at it, you might think that, hey, this looks like Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes, You look at this and you think, man, that's a lot of water out there. And I think every year we have challenges across the landscape in Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, no matter where we are, with either too much water and water ponding up, and water is ponding up and it's going to those lowest areas of the field, as you can see. But it's due to more the lack of infiltration in those soils. Yeah, that soil is naturally a swamp, basically. Think about historical Illinois and that area without tile, it's really hard to farm it, really. But those soils, even in southern Illinois here, we have a tremendous amount of soil loss due to erosion from rainwater. And I hear oftentimes farmers in central Illinois say, "Well, we don't lose soil to erosion from rain because we're so flat." Well, it goes somewhere. Even if it's not going off the field, there's still very fine clay particles that soil is moving down through the profile actually, and you're losing it in the depth there. But on the flip side of it, well, from the 1930s Dust Bowls to today, this is from this year, we're facing dust storms every stinking year anymore. A couple years ago, we had these dust storms that blocked up I-55, and we had some very tragic accidents. And we had these dust storms that occur across the state that's a tremendous amount of soil loss. Um, and, we think about it, it's like, well, it's just the conditions. Mother Nature dealt us this card, it's nothing we could do. Well, is it? I think that there's some better ways that we can farm. And unfortunately, if we don't do better, we're going to be left with the potential of regulation from the government telling us how to farm. And I don't think a lot of farmers are ready for that. But if you think about it, how many tons of soil are being lost there? We go back to that previous slide and think about the water and that water leaving the field, and what is it carrying it with it, and where does it end up? A lot of times it goes down our creeks, our rivers, and goes into reservoirs, and so it could carry the soil with it. It would have a lot of phosphorus, or it could have a lot of nitrate nitrogen in it. Well, that becomes a water quality issue, and then it costs a lot more money to treat that water for drinking water. And we have some health concerns with that. And then we'll have these during the summertime, these blue-green algal blooms, where we're restricted on swimming in some of these lakes and stuff because of the hypoxia, basically. Oh, and also with that, what else is being carried off into that stream? Think about the pesticides and things of that sort. Well, the same thing with these dust storms. How much nutrients are being blown off the field? Um, and we're breathing this air that has this dust in it, and how much pesticide application is in that? That has some very serious health effects to it. So, is it possible to repair and improve and restore soils? You know, Traditionally, if you listen to universities and such, and they would say, it takes hundreds and hundreds of years to build topsoil. And I think that's when you're looking at it from basically, a bottom-up approach where I believe that we can restore it. I've seen it being restored from a top-down approach by managing it properly with the right tools. So I think it's important that we understand kind of what soil is. And so this is just a diagram explaining the components of soil. And our soil is basically comprised of 50% pore space and a 50% solids. So that pore space is basically the porosity of the soil. So, it has air pockets in it, and then you want those air pockets when we have rain to fill up with water and to move through that profile, but you still want to maintain moisture in that profile. And I'll get into it a little bit, but the biggest reason why we need air and water in there is because the soil is alive. And the soil microbes in there, they make nutrients available to our cash crops. They are what are building what I call stable aggregates. And aggregates are the little lumps and clumps in that soil. And they're formed and decomposed within about 21 to 28 days by microbes. Well, microbes move around on thin films of water in that soil. right? And they need oxygen as well. So we need to have that airspace. We need it so it doesn't collapse. We need that soil to maintain that aggregation or the porosity in there and not collapse on itself. Um, and we need to have oxygen in there. We need to have water so they can move around. If you think about it, a microbe moves around like a couple centimeters in a 24-hour period, or even millimeters. It's basically like us going around the world. That's their whole life. So they have to be able to move around on those thin films of water on that. The other 50%, we're looking at the sand, silt, and clay, the mineral components, and the organic components of that soil. So that's a little bit about what soils are comprised
Hey,
of. Yes,
hey,
sir.
David, sorry to interrupt you. You've got about half of your presentation left.
Dang. All right, so here we are with photosynthesis, and this is what drives the whole system. And I think that we need to understand that green growing plants out there drive it. So it's the plants capturing sunlight energy and making sugars. Those sugars that they produce, they help with nutrient management and nutrient exchange in that plant, but they also release those sugars. Up to 50-60% of them every day into the soil, as you can see in the background here. Um, you can see that we've got these roots out here, and these roots um, are releasing that sugar, and the sugars in that root are um, feeding microbes in exchange for nutrients. Okay. So as the microbes are taking this nutrients up, they're also releasing carbon dioxide, just like you and I. And as that is being released, it goes up into the atmosphere. Well, the green growing plants take that carbon dioxide, combine it with water, making sugar again. And that's the whole carbon cycle, really. Um, let's see. Now I'm not advancing. What is going on here? Oops. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so plants feed the soil life, like I just explained, and the soil feeds the plants, and that's the system. I think we've too many times we thought that fertilizer feeds plants, and fertilizer does, but we need to realize that fertilizers first need to be taken in by a microbe and converted for the majority of them. And plants only take up maybe about 30% of the fertilizers that we actually apply. And there's a copious amount of nutrients in that soil that the microbes in the soil make available to the plants. Think about nobody fertilizes a fence row, nobody fertilizes the woods or anything like that, a timber, yet it grows pretty well on its own. So we know there's a large amount of nutrients there. What is going on?
I think it's just delayed response, like because of
Maybe.
bandwidth. Yeah, we tried out the presentation before everybody got on, and it was working pretty well.
Yeah.
Any ideas?
Well,
do
let me
not
do
have
something
any.
here. Let me go back into it. I apologize. There we go. So
There you
here's
go.
another video. This is what is happening in your soils. Plants every day capturing sunlight energy are releasing sugar, and what we see here is sugar being released out of the tip of that root, and that is feeding the microorganisms. They're like little kids on a sugar high. The more sugar you can give them, the more they give back. So it's a win-win. This picture here is a root that actually we hear a lot about fungus, and typically in agriculture, when we hear about fungus, we think about diseases and that we need to spray a fungicide, right, to kill fungus. Well, what we see here in the middle of that root, you see those little dark blue little blotches. That is actually our buscular mycorrhizae fungi. So those are beneficial fungi that live with inside that root cell that the plant has a mutual benefit with, and it'll share those sugars with it directly. And then you see these little strands of blue that are coming out of it, and that's its hyphae that explores out into the soil profile. And for instance, right next to that, you see a bigger blue kind of rectangle coming up there out of the main root, and that is a root hair. Okay, so that is how small this mycorrhizae is. And the mycorrhizae can explore 100 times more soil than what the actual root can, and it is very good at bringing back water and solubilizing organic nutrients and other nutrients in that profile and bringing it and feeding it to the plant. But it has to have that exchange with carbon, basically sugar, in order to do so. And if that mycorrhizae isn't bringing anything back, or if the plant has excess fertilizer right there, it doesn't allow the mycorrhizae to colonize its roots because it doesn't need to expel out any of its energy to that mycorrhizae. And it ends up costing us more money, actually. So this is the soil food web, and this is what when we start talking about the soil biology and we talk about microbes and plants and how they interact here. Like I said, sunlight up in the upper left, it drives the whole system with living plants. Um, and then we have different trophic levels. So we have the bacteria, the fungi, and the nematodes. Those are really small critters that we can't see with our naked eye. They have to be seen with a microscope. And then we go to the next trophic level of the shredders and the predators, the nematodes, the protozoa, earthworms, things like that. So those guys, the big guys, as we move to the right here, the big guys feed on the little guys. And think about a fish in the ocean, right? A big fish eats a small fish, and when an earthworm goes through the soil, it doesn't carry a spade with it and digs its way through, right? It's chewing through the soil and burrowing through, and it's eating fungi and nematodes and protozoa and bacteria and anything smaller than that, and crop residues. Well, if we've ever went fishing, we split apart an earthworm, you'll see that we get that black gunk on us, worm poop. Well, that's just bags of fertilizer, essentially. So as the big guy eats the little guy, it's what goes in comes back out the backside as fertilizer. Um,
Hey, David, you got 8 minutes, by the way.
okay. So, um, so this is a diagram of what an aggregate is. As we can see, we've got the roots going through there. We've got the mycorrhizae, fungi, the pore space and such. This image here is a 3D image. On the left is from soil that's never been disturbed, and on the right was actually it had been harvested by beet for beet harvest 14 years ago. So you can tell that the compaction layer from tillage and things like that, it hangs around for a long time. I like to say that our soil actually has a memory. It's kind of like reading the rings on a tree, and you can learn a lot from it. So how do we build soil health? When we look at it, there's four core principles that we've got to do: minimize soil disturbance, maximize the diversity, keep a continuous living root in that soil, and maximize soil cover as long as possible. So why minimize soil disturbance? These are some of the things that why it matters. It builds stable aggregates, it improves water infiltration, it provides a habitat for microorganisms, it reduces erosion. That's huge. And it increases the resilience of our soils to handle these big environmental stresses. Maximizing soil cover, it's basically about the same. It keeps the soil cooler. Think about this. It is basically the insulation that you put in the attic of your house. It keeps it cooler during the summer. It keeps it warmer during the winter. It also protects from the raindrops. So it's just like having good shingles or a good roof on your house, right? So the raindrop doesn't hit the soil and explode it and cause it to collapse. It builds the aggregates from the top down, provides habitat. It helps suppress weeds, and it helps to cycle nutrients for the next cash crop. Continuous living roots, they feed the microorganisms as we discussed. It increases that mycorrhizae fungi. It increases the root depth. So as that cover crop root is going down into that profile, and now we plant corn or soybeans into there, and we terminate that cover crop. As those root channels are dying out, the roots themselves, now we have a cash crop that is chasing down that. It doesn't have to have much. It doesn't have to push real hard to get down through there, and it's able to go deeper and explore more nutrients in that profile. Diversity is huge. When we think about this, we want a diversity of microorganisms. Even as our own culture, as people, we need diversity of people to survive. We can't all just be alike. Each plant produces different root exudates, and this is really important because each one of those plants has a different need for different nutrients, pounds per acre per day kind of thing. So it's feeding different organisms in that soil, and it helps to balance the good versus bad organisms. And the big thing is we can help suppress diseases with more diversity. So does conventional agriculture line up with this when we think about soil cover, disturbance, and living roots and diversity? Not at all. I mean, in the last 15 years, the big thing has been spray it in fall so you don't have any weeds growing in the spring, even if you work the ground. And I think, going back 40 years ago or so, we used to plow down a lot of more green manures and we used to do things like that. And I would argue that maybe our soils, even though we were doing tillage back then and quite a bit more, were better than what we have today because we were using green manure more so than just brown residue and terminate and rolling in brown dead material all the time. Um, when we start thinking about regenerative ag and row crops and how this works, uh, we want to have a cover crop that complements the next cash crop. So, where do we start? The biggest thing is we have to understand that corn likes a lot of nitrogen. So if we put grass species out there, they also like a lot of nitrogen. So cereal, rye, barley, wheat, triticale, if we put those in front of corn, it's going to soak up a lot of nitrogen and it doesn't release nitrogen back into that soil very quickly. And so it oftentimes can hinder a corn crop. So an easy way to start is oats and radish or another brassica before corn that winter kills off. That's an easy strategy that most farmers can do. Ahead of soybeans, well, soybeans make their own nitrogen. So we can use the grass species like cereal rye, barley, wheat, triticale before soybeans. I love adding a third crop into rotation and having wheat or small grain of some sort in there to help break up some of the disease pest cycles that we deal with. And also gives us a lot of opportunity to maybe put in some warm season cover crops and grow a lot of biomass. Um, we need to maybe use soil tests that provide a biological view of the soil and use cover crop biomass tests to see where we can actually cut back on fertilizer. And we need to try a little and get comfortable. Um, this is one of my farmers here. This is standing in a field of hairy vetch down here, not too far from me. The advantages of being in the South is we can do these things. We can grow big cover crops with hairy vetch and things like that. We're in the North when you get, much above, the Springfield, Decatur corridor going across the state. It takes longer for this to grow and get this massive. And so, that delays planting quite a bit. And then that delays harvest, and that can actually reduce profitability for a farmer. So there's a little give and take about what the guys in the north have an advantage of versus guys in the south, and vice versa. Now, typically what we do here is we roll it down and we plant corn into it with a roller crimper. We plant corn directly into that, and you can see that mat of residue that we have there. Very good weed suppression, and the corn just pops up right through that. That legume right there, cover crop, provides, that thick, 120 to 140 pounds of nitrogen. So we really are able to reduce the amount of nitrogen costs that we have to apply. It's one of the benefits of being in the South. In the North, you guys freeze. So you could actually, if you had a small grain, follow it with a warm season cover crop that had a lot of legume in it, and your ground stays frozen enough that you can maintain that nitrogen where we lose it in the South. So who should not use a cover crop? Well, this is something I started talking about is if you resist change, if you don't have a high tolerance for risk, if you do not like to be challenged, if you are not flexible and if you're not patient, do not use a cover crop because you are going to be upset all the time. And if you worry too much about what other people think, it's probably going to fail no matter what, And if you come into this thing about cover crops and have a negative perception, it's going to fail you. Now, the one thing I'll mention about cover crops too is it takes a good probably 5 years to start seeing some really big benefits in the soil. But the first year we can see benefits in erosion. And I think that should be key because, if we start talking about 5 tons an acre loss, if we had to replace that with topsoil from a landscaping nursery, that would cost about $500 an acre, or I'm sorry, $200 an acre. So serious money there. What about with livestock? We can use regenerative ag with grazing cover crops across fields, and this is some cattle strip grazing across cover crops. What goes in the front side comes out the back side. This is very, very profitable and improves soil very, very quickly. Restrictions, like was said earlier, is that fencing becomes an issue. Well, there's a lot of technology coming out, even some GPS collars that are like a dog collar that you put on around your yard as a fence that we could put on livestock to help graze them. But we still need to have a perimeter fence. And water is always an issue too. I think this is our advantage that we need to start looking at in Illinois, especially with fertilizer prices and just in general the economics of it. There's probably more value to be had with livestock than grain farming. The challenge is that most cash rents are annual rent basis, and there's no good. Like most farmers don't want to go and put a cover crop out there not knowing if they're going to farm it next year. They're not going to go and spend the money to build fence knowing that they're not going to have it the next year. So it needs to be a long-term goal. What about in vegetable production? Well, we could use heavy biomass to suppress out weeds and stuff and to keep something growing in there. Even in raised beds, I did it myself. Where I throw out cover crop seed mixes and just see what grows kind of thing. I just use it kind of as my own kind of research place, but to see what kind of works and doesn't, and throw it out there. You might have to till it in. That's okay. Some of the really small seeds, they probably are going to struggle germinating if they ever germinate through a thick biomass. So don't be afraid to till it in, or even make like a strip till where we're making a 7 or 8 inch wide tillage pass to plant the vegetable in while we have that cover crop in between the rows to suppress out the weeds. This is Joe Oltz. He's from Wisconsin, and he's knocking down some rye that he's planting pumpkins into with his little tractor and loader there. It works. Couple things.
Hey, David, we're down to 2 minutes.
All
So you
right.
might-
I'm about done. So here's a big thing. Soil testing, as mentioned before. I've used what's called the a Haney soil health test. So a conventional soil test only look at a small exchangeable pool of nutrients. That soil test was built to determine the likeliness of having a fertilizer response, and they do not take into consideration biology. Where the Haney test, we're using water and weak acids to mimic what plants are actually seeing in pounds per acre per day if it rains, to determine how much nutrients can become available, how much we can reduce that by. We're going to talk about that more in depth in was it two weeks, I think?
2 weeks. Yep, 2 weeks.
And so here's an example of a Haney test. This is from a fence row. The cool thing is, and we'll go through this later, but soil respiration rate in the fence row was 308. In the field right next to it, the microbial activity, the respiration rate was 70, right? The nutrient concentration in this fence row was through the roof compared to what the actual field was. So some huge advantages to just keeping something growing there. So the big things I want to take away here. Do not be a purist. I hear all the time guys say, "Oh, if you're going to do regenerative ag, you can't do tillage and or whatever. You can't use this, you can't use that." Don't be a purist with this, and you cannot sacrifice your cash crop for sake of soil health. This is a journey, not a destination. Here's a couple things: organic versus regenerative. In organic systems, there are strict guidelines that must be followed. Tillage is part of it, that you're probably going to have to use. I know that there's some guys talking about organic no-till. I've worked with some guys that have tried it. We've tried many different things, and it does not work. And it ends up going back to using some tillage to control some of our weed escapes and stuff. With regenerative, pesticides can be used. If you don't want to use them, you don't have to. Tillage can be used. There's no certification process, which means there's also really no market out there for any premiums. There's no transition period. There's a flexibility. You can still use synthetic fertilizer.
This is it, David. Last slide.
Yeah, here we go. This is one we've been waiting for. So regenerative farming is very complex. It is a thinking man's or person's game. When I talked about flexibility and patience, you have to have plans in place and think about 3, 4, 5 years out. But every spring, every fall, you have to have plans A through Z and 1 to 100 because Mother Nature's never kind. Sometimes it's too dry, sometimes it's too wet. It's like a Goldilocks approach, really. So we have to have all these plans in place to understand how to use this and how to be very profitable with it. So with that, we'll leave it at that. I hope you all can understand and see that I'm very, very passionate about this.
Absolutely. So we probably have time for a question or two. And there was a question before about slides and that kind of thing. So we're definitely going to have YouTubes of all 5 webinar sessions that we'll share with attendees. And then based on that comment, I think we're going to ask all of our speakers to share their slide decks as well, so we can send that to people separately, because David has some great slides as well. So any quick questions? We have one quick question about regenerative ag or anything that you heard. I feel like we're sending a lot of information at you, but hopefully it's giving you some new insights. All right, is there a question here?
Question, it might be dumb. Maybe that's dumb. I'm sorry.
There's a question, how do they sell topsoil when it's limited? Do you mean sell topsoil at a local like hardware store or a store where you're buying topsoil?
I bought it. I bought it.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, so I'll ask David. So David, like how is topsoil produced for your garden? Like are they just scraping it off of some good farm field?
Yeah, I mean, you think about new construction builds and stuff like that in town, and they're scraping off the best topsoil to build a house on, and a lot of that will go back into a pile, get sifted through it, and get bagged up, and it's sold to you very, very pricely. Same thing happens at landscape nurseries. Some of them will make some compost and mix it with some topsoil and do something like that. But yeah, um, rock quarries and stuff like that, they scrape off a lot of topsoil and they sell it.
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Collins. I am formerly the Director of Land Preservation for the McHenry County Conservation District, where I served there nearly 40 years and directed ecological restoration and land preservation activities on about 25,000 acres of land. I retired in the fall of 2024. And this afternoon, I would like to provide some information for landowners who are considering enlarging the concept of what their farm might be, from simply land that produces a crop and an income to land that also produces other things. So my goal today, I have 4 concepts I'd like to share with you in our time together. And they're helping you to look at your land in a more holistic sense, viewing its resources and how you choose to utilize them not as individual components, but as an integrated ecological system. I'd like to introduce you to a few of the diverse resources and methodologies that are available that can reveal the journey of your land from its wilderness beginnings through multiple landowners and intense ecological changes to today, where your own ownership is shaping the next destination in that journey. I'd like to provide you with a basic understanding of how damaged land heals over time and a sense of what you can expect as you transform your own tenure with the land from that of simply a landowner to a land steward. And lastly, I'd like to share some tools of a different type, some less scientific concepts that offer ways to enjoy a deeper connection to your farm and the many forms of life that are also tenants on your land and dependent on your decisions for survival. The process of exploring the natural and cultural history of your farm is sometimes referred to as forensic ecology or landscape genealogy. Discovering the land use history of your property allows you to better understand it, both temporally in terms of time and spatially. Now, our time together today does not allow us to delve into every resource that's available to you. But once you become familiar with the process, you may find that you are continually uncovering new information. I began teaching this as an 8-hour class in 1990, and some of those earliest students are still learning amazing things about their land 35 years later. I like to think that every farm exists in 4 chapters that are governed by 4 simple truths. And that is that each generation writes another chapter and each landowner is a new author. The current condition of your land is a reflection of the chapters that were written prior to your ownership. And someday you'll pass the book on to another reader who will author the next chapter. When you write that final chapter, the final paragraph on your ownership, how do you want it to read? It is the last of these simple truths that is perhaps the most important, and certainly the one that brings us together today. Your farm's previous chapter should be understood and they should be honored as part of the story, but you're not bound by the past. Each era of landowners works the land based on the economics, the technology, and the ethics of their era. Ours is a time of unparalleled technologies for understanding land as never before. It is also a time of unprecedented peril for the survival of myriad forms of life here on Earth, from monarch butterflies to grassland birds. Both of these realities intersect on your farm. Your land, above all else, should be a reflection of your personal values and what you believe to be important in life. If your land is to be a reflection of your own personal ethics and values, it's critical to understand your farm not as a collection of individual parts like hay fields and crop ground, building envelopes, etc., but rather as an ecological and a cultural whole. I have chosen 5 basic areas that can allow any landowner to begin the process of broadening their view. Such an approach makes your land more than simply an economic engine that produces a crop and an income. It is a first step to creating a place for abundant life to flourish in all of its remarkable complexity. And those 5 areas, simply stated, are: where do the bones of my land originate? How alive is my soil? How does my land collect, store, and redistribute water? Does my farm still possess a genus loci with an ecological memory? And what past cultural scrapbook pages remain on my farm's landscape? In terms of geology, and in the interest of time, I've only chosen 2 aspects of geology that every landowner should come to know. What is the underlying bedrock below your soil? Where did it originate, and how old is it? The second is whether your land experienced glacial advances recently, in the distant past, or perhaps not at all. And in as diverse a state as Illinois, depending on where you're located in the state, that any one of those 3 may be the truth, or even 2 on the same farm. Answering both these questions will give you an idea of what the bones of your land is made of. Now, we've talked a lot about soil today, and it's a remarkable topic, and you can spend a lifetime studying it and not know even a tenth of what there is to know. So if geology forms the bones of your land, then the soil is the skin that covers those bones. A single pound of fertile Illinois topsoil contains between 900 million and 1 trillion living organisms. There is literally a universe of life below your feet in every step that you take on your land. As you've heard, these organisms include bacteria and fungi and protozoa and nematodes and macroorganisms like worms that you can actually see with your naked eye. Healthy organic matter in today's soils is measured at between 2 and 4%. But consider that in soils tested from unplowed virgin prairie, that organic matter is nearly 10 to 12%. Knowing the current health of your soil is crucial to managing your farm, just as having a yearly checkup is important to human health. So you should ask yourself, is your soil overdue for a physical? The Earth as a planet supports a complex water cycle that is constantly in motion, redistributing water across both the surface and the subsurface landscape. Those same patterns of water movement occur on your farm as well at a micro level. Do you know where your raindrops collect? Do you know where they flow? Do you know where they're stored on your farm? That's an important consideration and one you should be aware of. Across most of the ancient classical world, the Greek and Roman roots from which our Western society is descended, human beings once believed in a genus loci, a spirit of place. And in this worldview, every woods, every river, every spring and hill possessed an individual guardian spirit that looked after that place. Does your farm harbor such place still? Perhaps a woodland or a patch of wildflowers somewhere in the fence row? Maybe a flooded field after a heavy rain, or an old marsh that rises ghost-like from the corn stubble each April. Do you honor such places for the magic they hold? Or do you consider them a problem that needs to be fixed? Are there places on your land that hold old cultural memories of another era before you owned the farm? Do you see beyond the tarnish of age and into the human interactions that were once part of such places? Recognizing these spots as more than an old foundation or an obsolete milk house grounds you in the knowledge that you are only the latest inhabitant on this parcel of land, and allows you to better understand the previous lives that your farm has lived. So, how do you go about understanding these 5 principles and more? How do you understand your farm's ecological and cultural story? Here are 5 good places to start. No matter where you live in Illinois, your farm story starts in the very same place. It was all once wilderness, part of a massive wilderness continent. Whether your land lays in the Shawnee Hills or the poorly drained prairies of northeastern Illinois, it all begins with this wilderness. So knowing what flavor the original wilderness of your farm was is important. It tells you how the farm started out. One of the simplest ways to get a sense of what type of natural communities once covered your land is to use the USDA soil maps, but in a different way than what they were originally created to do. Identify the soil types that occur on your farm. And as Spring pointed out, each soil type is going to have a number associated with it that tells you all kinds of neat things. Using online resources or asking your local soil and water NRCS office or maybe a local university, find out what type of vegetation your soils developed under. You don't have to get precise. Just use grasslands, woodlands, or wetlands, sometimes also called hydric soils. Code them in 3 different colors and color by number all the soils on your farm based on those 3 simple codes. You'll be left with a broad snapshot of what kind of natural communities once occurred on your farm and which natural communities you can successfully restore on your property. This is a slide of an entire county based on grasslands, wetlands, and woodlands. The white areas you see are either water or places where the soil has been removed for mining. So you can get a really good idea, broad snapshot of what wilderness covered your property before it was a farm. Another resource that will provide documentation of the natural community and the landscape present before your farm was established is the Government Land Office, or sometimes referred to as the GLO notes. These are land descriptions and measurements completed in the early 19th century that divided the Illinois wilderness into townships, allowing settlers to purchase land from the federal government. Land in Illinois is divided into 1-mile sections, with a typical section being 1 mile or 80 chains on each side, so it's a square mile. And every square mile of the state had to be walked, measured, and monumented in order to be legally owned. A full township consists of 36 square miles. The numbering system is the result of how the survey moved, generally from east to west and then back, with new surveys beginning off of older established survey lines that were completed earlier, and each section is given a number. The GLO survey divided each full 640-acre or 1 square mile section into 4 160-acre quarter sections, which could then be further divided into smaller acreages. The term the back 40 is an example of that kind of measurement. Knowing your land's legal description is the identification key that stays with the property and allows you an easy method to locate it on maps and other resources as you do research. The survey party was charged with not only measuring, but also describing every section line they walked. This included mentioning the type of natural community they encountered, the species of trees covering the land they were measuring, and rating the soil for farming, as well as any other remarkable and permanent features. The GLO maps and the notes are now available online in several sources, and they can be accessed and read by anyone doing research. Another useful tool for understanding your land is using sequential aerial photos. Today, such photos are accessible through online platforms like Google Earth or ArcGIS Online. The first complete photo set for the state in Illinois dates from the late 1930s, and they're available in most areas for each decade after that. They track real-time changes to the land. Let's use Nipperson Creek to illustrate how you can see those changes. In this 1939 air photo, look towards the center and the lower left, and you'll see the meandering course of Nipperson Creek. By 1954, you can see that the central portion of the stream has been bypassed and turned into a ditch, leaving the old channel out in what's now a field. The portion of the channel that lies to the lower left of the screen is still in its original condition. By 1967, even that has changed. And you now have a 3.5-mile section of stream that's been converted from a meandering natural stream channel to a straight ditch. Aerial photo also illustrates the changes you're making to your land, and it documents them for future generations. This air photo taken in 2000 shows Nipperson Creek returned back to its original channel as part of the Nippersink Dechannelization Project. I would add too that the availability of drones gives you a localized and inexpensive tool for recording changes to your land over time. Perhaps no other land use change will have as an important effect on your efforts if you decide to restore land or even to farm it more holistically as to how the water cycle on your farm has changed over the past 200 years. Tile drainage arrived in Illinois just prior to the Civil War and constitutes one of the largest engineering feats ever accomplished in the state, albeit mostly invisible because it lies below the ground. It occurred in two peak periods from 1870 to 1920, and then post-war from 1945 to 1960. Tiling and retiling still goes on today, but the vast majority of wet soils have already had tiles installed in them. How do drain tiles work? Well, simply stated, under drainage moves subsurface water out of the soil and downstream away from the farm. It converts wetland communities to farmable land by doing so. Because the tiles lie at a slight pitch downward, water percolating through the soil will enter through the seams and flow away from the field, typically into an outlet in a drainage ditch or a stream. You cannot successfully restore natural communities on your land without understanding how that land's original hydrology has been altered. No comprehensive tile mapping exists for Illinois. However, the location of tile outlets, sizes, and much additional information is often known by your farm's leasee or by older residents in the area. Some farms are part of drainage districts organized to make draining large wetlands owned by multiple residents more cost effective. If your farm is in a drainage district, the locations of tiles laid by the district are a matter of public record. I'd also like to talk about plat books. Plat books and land ownership books are fairly common in the United States and Canada, and you can still buy them today, although now they're mostly digital. Those plat books will give you the owner and the amount of acreage and a few facts. However, the plat books or land ownership books of the 19th century are truly an American work of art, and they carry a wealth of information on land. Let's use the 1872 plat book for McHenry County as an example of the information you might find that can help you do restoration work on your farm. Here you see an entire township. This is McHenry Township. The water resources are listed, including all the way down to springs and first order streams, which are typically no wider than the tabletop. You can see the where farms are located, where orchards are around houses. You can even see the timber boundaries, and you can see where large marshes are also marked on the map. So there's a wealth of information just from as bird's eye view as an entire township. When we start moving downward and looking more closely at a given part of these plat books, we can see those features pop out. Here you can see a series of springs that come out of the side of a wooded hill, marked towards the left center of the map. And if we go even further down and look at an individual farm, for example, the Orvis farm or the Andrews farm, we can see where springs were, where the orchards were around houses, what water courses were there, even large marshes that persisted on the property. So quite a bit of information in these books. And the website there will tell you how many books have been published for your county. And you can track down often at local libraries or historical societies where you can look at them. I'd like to say a few words about learning to enjoy the restoration ride if you decide to allow a portion of your property to be a wild place. Not all crops can be planted, germinated, and harvested in a single season. Restoring a native grassland composed of dozens of different plant species requires a different approach. If you decide to dedicate a part of your farm to such an endeavor, understand that the project entails that you integrate a really different mindset to judging its success. You need to make peace with time. Restoring natural communities takes multiple growing seasons, and most of the projects start slow and build over time. Teach yourself to see, to listen, and importantly, to sense. Changes to natural communities can be very subtle. Spend time observing and watching such subtleties. Small hints like seeing new butterflies or plants appearing where you know you didn't seed them in are indicators that your land is healing. Understand the concept of ecological jumps, or all things in their time. Many restoration projects can appear to stand still for multiple growing seasons and then suddenly take off. This is often the result of important things going on in that universe below your feet. Most restoration projects make such ecological jumps at 5 to 10-year intervals. And finally, accept that restoration is the never-ending story. Restoration projects are never done, and once a landowner accepts that this is the case, they're free to enjoy the ever-changing nature of a prairie or a wetland project. So what if you don't want to take on that big restoration project right away? You want to think about whether you want to do it or not. How can you make your farm more holistic? What are simple things you can do to help your land heal and become a more healthy ecological system? Well, here are 7 simple practices for better land health. Consider maybe you can adopt one per year. Not everything has to be done all at once. An easy one is to preserve your fence lines. When your farm operator wants to remove that fence line because corn may hit the side of his tractor, you do not have to make his land safe for the last 6 rows of corn. Most of the common birds we see around farms have habitat that they utilize in fence lines. So preserve your fence lines. Allow them to be part of what your farm allows to be preserved. Consider utilizing a cover crop in fall on your fallow fields. This will enrich the soil, it will make it healthier, and it'll provide habitat over the winter for wildlife that might live on your farm. Phase out dicamba use on your farm and limit the use of neonicotinoids on your fields. Dicamba is implicated in oak tatters, which is caused by drift from dicamba spray, and it can occur as much as 2 or 3 miles from the site the dicamba is applied to. And neonicotinoids are implicated in insect collapse because they're actually part of the plant themselves. And they have been implicated in the death of bee colonies as well. So consider phasing them out. Don't cut your hay fields until July 15th and pass a savings on to your farmer who won't get the benefit of that best first cutting of hay, but you will get the benefit of making a successful breeding home for grassland birds whose declines are precipitous and who are lured into hay fields by the structure only to have their nest destroyed right around the time the nestlings are hatching out and being fed. So consider moving that date back and accepting less money for that hayfield. Create buffer and filter strips around wetlands and watercourses. They don't have to be wide. Even 10 or 15 feet will help keep pesticides and soil erosion from clogging waterways and clean them up and provide habitat for species that depend on water resources. Stop using your bug zapper. A number of scientific studies have been conducted on what they actually kill, and about 10 to 12% of the insects that die in bug zappers are mosquitoes. The rest are moths, butterflies, katydids, other beneficial insects, including a number of pollinators. Turn them off and put bug spray on. It's a lot cheaper. And finally, consider turning those unproductive areas of your farm that don't produce well to begin with into high-quality native habitat. Select them as the first place where you might experiment with creating a prairie or experiment with creating a woodland or a wetland. There are also tools of a different type. They're not as scientific as researching soils or hydrology, but they are no less important to developing a relationship to your farm. Find your property's heart, that spot on your farm where you feel the most palpable connection to the land, and return to this spot frequently as you heal your land. Find the relics of the past chapters of your farm, like fence rows and building foundations and rock piles, tile fields, and even the farm dump, to understand the past journey of your property. Learn your land in all its moods. If you have not seen the shadows that moonlight makes on August corn, or sat mesmerized by the flashing of fireflies on a June night, or walked the land as it sleeps beneath the snow, can you really say you know your farm? Until you smell the scent of petrichor after an April storm, do you really understand the living soil of your fields? If you have never put on rain gear and rubber boots and followed the falling raindrops from the highest point on your property to the lowest point, do you really comprehend your land's localized water cycle? Such a familiarity is no less important than making a species list for prairie restoration. It is relearning a language that all of humanity once knew, the linguistics of landscape. The Earth has undergone 5 major extinction events in its 4 billion-year-old life, brought on by natural events such as meteor impacts or massive volcanic eruptions. Today we are living through the 6th major extinction event, the only one ever brought on by one of Earth's own biological creations, humanity. If unchecked, it has the potential to outstrip even the loss of species that followed the meteor impact that killed off the dinosaurs. For the vast majority of people, the problem seems so vast, so complex, that individual action pales in comparison to the economic and social forces driving the loss of Earth's miracles. What can I do when the problem is so large and I am one person? Those of you in attendance today are in a unique position as a landowner. No, you cannot control what new and toxic chemical soup is applied to millions of acres of crop ground across the country, or stop corn and soybean agrobiz from ripping down miles of fence lines to make the world safe for those last 6 rows of corn that are shaded by it. But you can control what happens on the small piece of the world that a greater universe has placed into your hands to care for. Someday, you will write the last chapter of your time as the owner of your farm for the future to contemplate. How shall it read? Thank you very much I appreciate the opportunity to have presented things to you. If you have any additional contacts, my contact information is here. Please feel free to drop me an email.